The ceasefire in Gaza, the fragile ceasefire, the ceasefire with the constant Zionist breaches, constant Zionist barbarism against the civilians, constant Zionist killing of infants and people. It has been fragile, but it's going. And one of the main things that they're talking about now is phase 2. Now we're in phase 1. What's going to happen in phase 2? Where is Israel going to withdraw to? And which forces are going to be in Gaza? Every day we hear new names, and multiple countries showed their willingness to. As a matter of fact, the American administration is speaking with more countries now who would be interested in participating in Gaza. But there's a problem. There's a problem, and that problem is these forces are not really convinced by the recipe that's being given to them. International Stabilization Force, ambiguity and obstacles, one of the articles here stated. Why? Because according to them and according to the countries that would be involved in this International Stabilization Force, they don't know exactly what they're going to do. You see, the Israeli side is saying, yeah, we're going to disarm Hamas, and the Israelis are saying we're going to disarm Hamas, and their mission is to disarm them and provide security, provide this, provide that. And Israel is having certain conditions on who's going to participate or not. The American side, however, had a different agreement with the Arab countries and Muslim countries too, by saying that this is a temporary force. Their goal is not going to be to necessarily disarm the Palestinian resistance, but rather pave the way for the next phase. And they're talking about a Palestinian state in the 1967 borders. The only thing that the Palestinian resistance would consider a reason or a valid reason to disarm. And in that case, it wouldn't be disarming, it would be handing the resistance arms to the Palestinian state, to the independent, sovereign Palestinian state, not a proxy state, not a puppet state, not a state that doesn't have sovereignty, not a state that doesn't have its own decision. Of course, that would be the natural thing, merge into the country. But Israel has other ideas that the Trump administration has been entertaining to an extent. The only thing that they were criticizing was the Israeli plans or moves, especially the initial vote in the Israeli Knesset to go and annex the West Bank. Trump, J.D. Vance, they said that's not going to happen. And there is some power battle here, especially because of the limited leverage that Donald Trump has now with Benjamin Netanyahu and his offer or actual move to grant him amnesty internally. All of the talk about Benjamin Netanyahu being granted amnesty in Israel or a plea deal happened due to the proposals of Donald Trump. As a matter of fact, he stated that when he had his speech in the Israeli Knesset. And now, and again, that's another evidence that there's some sort of a power game here, power battle. Benjamin Netanyahu went to this base, this HQ in Kiryat Gat in South Israel, where the United States is supposed to be running the show to an extent on what happens in Gaza. They said that we're stopping certain attacks, they prevented Israel from doing certain things, and also recently Israel even made a threat to crunch into territories behind the yellow line, going back to square one, and now they said these plans are called off until further notice. Why? Because there was an American request from us not to continue with this plan. Clearly, there's some sort of a battle there. Now, how did Netanyahu try and counter the battle or the image of Israel being an American proxy, because that's how in Israel they're joking now, oh, you're a proxy of Donald Trump. There was even a video published in the Israeli television of Trump as an emperor, and Benjamin Netanyahu was an obedient little slave. And it's going ahead. Not that this reflects the true picture here at the end of the day, especially with what the Trump administration granted Israel so far in being fully participant in the genocide in Gaza. But there's something here. Netanyahu went down to that HQ and he said that, oh yeah, along the lines of, we're glad that our partners are here, of course, to monitor the situation and help us continue. Oh, really? Is that supposed to be like a convincing argument that our partners are here? What kind of an independent state brings foreign powers to come and manage a battle or a genocide, to be more specific, or stop certain operations of the Israeli army? What kind of an independent nation does that? In effect, now, what we do have is international forces in Israel and no international forces in Gaza. This is a reality. And Netanyahu was very worried about that. And people in the Israeli press were asking him, listen, the Trump administration also said there's no annexation of the West Bank. What's happening here? You said the Knesset passed this initial motion. Of course, it's not an obligation to continue with it. Most likely it's going to be rejected in the second vote that will have a bigger majority against. But it was more symbolic. However, he said that no, we're partners. We're partners, and we're not a proxy. We're not a proxy state, and we're not a puppet state for the United States administration. So because of this lack of clarity, that according to multiple sources within the United States and also in the mediating countries too, that was the only formula that would go into it, to the ceasefire. There was no other formula that all parties could agree upon. There was no way that both sides, or primarily the Israeli side, most of the criticism, all of the criticism actually was against Israel, apart from the American administration, because they're complicit at the end of the day. They said that there's no way that we're going to reach an agreement that would declare an ending of the war. The only way we can do it is find this initial move, this initial document, so that we can push the two sides to start with the ceasefire agreement. Later on, we build upon that, because that's better than what we have at the moment. That was the approach. That's why we also have these breaches, but undeniably also because the lack of a proper position from the primarily Arab countries backing for the Palestinian side. Again, not to undermine the efforts, not to undermine the actual work. They have indeed put in a lot of efforts to try and reach the ceasefire, and some of them sacrificed, and some of them were threatened, some of them fell under a lot of pressure. However, still, this went on for 2 years, and had there been a better position, we could have potentially had an even better ceasefire with no Israeli breaches, let alone the fact that this genocide could have been stopped. That option was there. Now, moving on, next, the Israeli side, they're still preparing. So we're talking about a country that, they're entering a ceasefire agreement. They haven't declared the ending of the war. Really and truly, one of the primary reasons why Israel entered this ceasefire agreement is the fact that they were humiliated militarily, and they did not have sufficient numbers for their terrorist army to continue the operations inside of Gaza. Hence why they're doing what? They are still trying to recruit the members of the Haredi community inside of Israel to go and join the army, because over 60% weren't following conscription orders. But that's not really going very well. These were some of the latest protests of the Haredi Orthodox community in Israel. Thousands, if not tens of thousands, in the streets of occupied Palestine, saying, no, we're not going to the army, we refuse conscription. And there were also clashes as well. Let's have a look at this here. Clashes, problems, again, thousands, not tens of thousands actually going out and protesting. Why? Because Israel is still trying to force conscription on the people. Why are they still trying to force conscription on the people? Because they have plans, and these plans did not end with this pause, with this very fragile ceasefire agreement. If they had enough people to continue the genocide on a full scale, they would have continued. Don't think that they're all of a sudden they switched and became, they are still the same nation, rooted with evil and with terror and with everything that you can think of and saw in the past 2 years. That's still the same country. Nothing changed. And no amount of propaganda and social media buying and people pretending to be free speech advocates and alternative media pretending, and in reality are playing nothing but a dirty role for global Zionism, Zionist mouthpieces. No amount is going to help you. Nothing is going to help you. And they're still proving to the whole world their true nature. They're still proving that we are an entity of terror. We are war criminals, because even when we have a de-escalation, we continue to kill infants. We continue to maim infants. Like what they've done just a couple of days ago. They staged this attack in an area where they are present in, that's not under the Palestinian resistance control directly. And what do they do as a response? They start butchering children. They start killing them left, right, and center. If they had all of those numbers, they would have continued. They wouldn't have stopped. Because they did face certain pressure at one point, or in multiple points in the 2 years of genocide, but they did not stop because they still had capacity. Although the military was telling the political leadership and political echelon, don't, because we're getting exhausted. Let's not forget that the Israeli army's ground troops went to 1/3 of its size that it was 2 decades ago. So we already had an incapable ground army. They were already incapable, let alone untrained, by the way, because they weren't fighting in urban warfare in Gaza. They were fighting in destruction warfare in Gaza. The same destruction that they caused that later flipped against them and to the favor of the Palestinian resistance, because they know their surroundings, they know their geography, they know their ins and outs. And it made it much more difficult for any Israeli forces on the ground to target any of the Palestinian resistance fighters under all of this destruction.